Right, that was me tweeting. You don't need to see that. Right, I'm just going to do a quick test. Oh, okay. Let's do this the other way. Gonna do a bit quick test. Gonna do a bit quick test. Yep, I'm gonna turn myself off so I don't repeat. Cool. That'll work. Oh, oh, it appeared there. Maybe I chose the wrong sort of colour for this. But I think that worked. Right, so this time around I will be doing Paladin. I quite like Paladin because Paladin to me feels like... Oh, yes. I mean, that... Can you see that? Is it coming through okay? I'm just trying to make sure it's seeable in a video. I feel like I need to change the colour of it or something. Because this is all white, and I think adding an extra layer of white, like white writing on it. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna need to go into that a bit more and figure out how to change the colour of it so that it isn't white. That's gonna have to be a after stream thing. Anyway, I quite like Paladin because I feel like it kind of does what I'd want from just cool. Thanks. While it kind of does what I kind of want a martial class to do, which is unintentionally. Not only does it have the swords and obviously the martial part of it, but because of all the different kinds of smites and how the fact that smites your big thing, it kind of feels like you're just a really strong martial user. Of course, it does have other spells, but a lot of the time you will be doing smites of different varieties. Um, let's just go through this class, starting off with Ancients. Now, Ancients is just a base player handbook one, which is quite interesting. I'm not going to go through the tenets because this is going to be this is going to feel like a stupid thing to the average person, but I didn't realize for a long time you can just choose tenets that you want to choose. These are more like guidelines than actual things you need to follow. But I will focus on the oath spells and stuff. The oath spells for Oath of the Ancients are interesting. You get Moonbeam, which notably is a decently powerful spell that makes sense for you to have on your paladin. Sure, you're going to be hit a lot because you're going to be melee most of the time, but it is a spell you can concentrate on and get a little bit of bonus damage. Misty Step is also pretty relevant because having a bonus action teleport is very useful, both for getting in and to out of combat. Ensnaring Strike's not bad. You can do it on a weapon attack. It's gonna keep them in combat with you. Other notable things: protection from energy is probably never coming up unless you specifically know what you're going up against. Ice Storm's not too bad, but it's gonna fall off a bit. Stone Skin is normally not that useful because it's not a resistance to non-magical versions of everything. Um, Commune with Nature may come up. Tree Stride probably doesn't come up much. As you can probably see, there's a quite heavy emphasis on nature with this one. Um, which I quite like the idea of someone being so old that they've made like a deal with nature incarnate. It's quite an interesting idea. Then you have Nature's Wrath, which is the channel divinity. You can use your channel divinity to invoke primal forces to ensnare a foe. As an action, you can cause spectral vines to spring up and reach for a creature within 10 feet of you that you can see. The creature must succeed on a strength or dex saving throw, its choice, which is kind of a pretty. I do not know what just happened, it just disappeared. Give me a second. There. Had a little bit of a glitch. It was weirdly doing some stuff. I'm not downloading anything, which is a bit of a weird thing to happen. But oh well. But while I'm waiting for this to load up, having it where they have to make a strength or dex, but they get to choose is quite a scary thing to do, because in general they're gonna have one of those two that they're pretty good at. A lot of the time, a boss will either be freakishly strong or at least decently dexterous. Obviously, you have some outliers in the sense that you have magic-based bosses will probably not have any form of dexterity of any kind. Oh, this is taking a while to load. Um, but in general, like dealing with a dragon, for example, dragons are probably going to have decently high strength. Dealing with a duelist or even just a decent swordsman, in general, they're probably going to have decently high dexterity of some variety. So this does significantly nerf the ability. They must succeed on a strength or dexterity saving throw or be restrained. While restrained by the vines, the creature repeats the saving throw at the end of each of its turns. On its success, it frees itself and the vines vanish. So restrained's not a bad ability. Bearing in mind these channel divinities, you get one of them, and then I think you get another one later on. I don't think it says it there, but I'm pretty sure you get another one later on. Um, so this is a one-time thing. I think basing it compared to newer subclasses, I feel like the restrained condition, although good, because it does mean that they can't move, so you can keep them in combat. It does mean that you get advantage on attacks on them, and they have disadvantage. Disadvantage on dex saves does come up if you've got a magic caster in your group. I do feel like this ability is a bit underpowered for modern D&D because of this sort of idea of them getting to choose and the restraint not being a game-breakingly good ability. Like, if that said Petrify, I'd be saying this was overpowered, even with this ability that says you get to choose. But it's not Petrify, it's just Restrained, and Restrained's not that interesting. I think if this was made modern, either you would have multiple uses of this ability, which would go against how Channel Divinity works, or it would have a powerful status effect to it, so it would be something like Paralyze. The second ability, Turn the Faithless. You can use your Channel Divinity to utter ancient words that are painful for Fey and Fiends to hear. As an action, you present your holy symbol, and each Fey or Fiend within 30 feet of you that can hear you must succeed on a Wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the creature is turned for 1 minute, or until it takes damage. A turned creature must spend its turns trying to move as far away from you as it can, and it can't willingly move to a space within 30 feet of you. It also can't take reactions. For its action, it can only use the dash action or try to escape from an effect that prevents it from moving. If there's nowhere to move, the creature can use the dodge action. If the creature's true form is concealed by an illusion, shape-shifting, or other effect, the form is revealed while it's turned. But this is effectively like a different version of what all clerics get, which is turn undead. Except it has that little added effect of being able to see true forms, which is very useful when it comes to specifically fiends and fae, who are known for deceiving and shape-shifting and all different kinds of like ways to trick you. Uh, normally, if this was the only ability you got at this level, I would Jesus, I would be a bit apprehensive about this ability. But seeing as it's an ability that appears it's one of two abilities, I don't think this is as bad as I initially would put. I don't mind it. I think it's one of those abilities that is going to be very niche, but I think it's probably going to get more use than you'll actually get out of the cleric's turn undead, because this one doesn't have a restriction on CR, which one of them did, which the cleric one did. Admittedly, that was just to get the additional effect, but I still think that this one's going to happen more. I mean, it is a one-time use, so you can just cast this ability, and it do absolutely nothing, and you just wasted your channel divinity. But you're going to expect that off channel divinities now. But if I had to guess, I think modern ones would say if you fail, you don't use this charge. Overall, I don't mind these two abilities. I just think generally they're a bit weaker than what you would get nowadays. Right, 7th level ability, Awe of Warding. Beginning at 7th level, ancient magic lies so heavily upon you that it forms an eldritch ward. You and friendly creatures within 10 feet of you have resistance to damage from spells. This is a very powerful ability and a very, very interesting ability, because although it seems very simple and it only takes up 2 lines of this document, it is notably very, very powerful, because this is just going anything that you get hit by that's a spell. So any magic casters you're dealing with, any bosses that you're dealing with that specialize in spells, and there will be people like this in all of the campaigns I've been in. Most factions will have a spellcaster that's casting spells, not necessarily on you, but they'll have a spellcaster, and most of the time it will be on you. And so having this ability that just goes you take half damage from it is huge. Absolutely huge. If you get that on most if you're near your barbarian ally, you've just made their health so much. You just increase their survivability by so much. And when it gets to 18th level, increasing to 30 feet means you don't even really need to be that close to them. Like, you can have them being like, maybe not the back line, but near the back line. Undying Sentinel. Starting at 15th level, when you are reduced to 0 hit points and are not killed outright, you can choose to drop to 1 hit point instead. Once you use this ability, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. Additionally, you suffer none of the drawbacks of old age, and you can't be aged magically. Now, that second line of text, you suffer no drawbacks of old age and you can't be aged magically, I think are almost entirely going to be narrative tools. Because realistically, the drawback of old age, that never normally comes up like in an actual situation. There's not actually like rules for it. I think you could use that as a narrative thing for either an NPC or a character, where it's like you have a bunch of plucky young adventurers, and then you just have this old guy that's is obviously very experienced, and you expect for him to be, because he's old and he looks he looks like he's past his best. you'd expect him to be this weak kind of individual, and then you watch as he, decimates a horde of fiends that attack and something because he's a level 15 paladin. I mean, the can't age magically ability may come up. I think it's very unlikely because I don't know a lot of, at least in base D&D, things that specifically age you magically. I saw someone making a homebrew character for it, and maybe if your DM knows that you have this ability or will have this ability by the time you meet a certain character, maybe they like narratively, well, not narratively, they just make it so that there's an enemy you fight that has this sort of ability. Maybe. I don't I think it's a very niche case for that second line, but the first line of text is interesting. It's not a bad ability. I can't help but think of the monk review we did last week, and how that way of death monk that I was complaining about being a bit like not having its like a proper image to it had a similar ability to this, except it could be used as many times as you wanted as long as you used a key point. And this one doesn't have a key point. Well, this one doesn't have that kind of clause. You can't do it multiple times. So I can't help but then compare those two and feel like this one, although will have that kind of narrative moment that I've talked about with other classes that have a revive ability, where you're down and out, you've hit zero, but you're needed in battle, and it's like, I use this ability, I get back up again, and it having this cool narrative experience to it. I don't know how often it actually will come up. Finally, it's the level 20 ability. Now, all of the paladins have this unique thing that you don't see in any other class, but they all have the same theme for their capstone ability, and all of them are at level 20, obviously, and all of them are these special forms. Um, they all have effectively a super form, and this one's their one. It's Elder Champion. At 20th level, you can assume the form of an ancient force of nature, taking on appearance you choose. So you could have it suggests here that your skin might turn into bark, your hair might become leafy, you might sprout antlers. I like those ideas. The idea that you become like a living tree, or you become like a lion creature. Very, very interesting. Makes me think of like instances of pictures of like fae and more nature-like creatures, like the deer-headed like hunter idea. Using your action, you undergo a transformation. For 1 minute, you gain the following benefits. At the start of each of your turns, you will gain 10 hit points. Not bad. Whenever you cast a paladin spell that has a casting time of 1 action, you can cast it using your bonus action instead. Very useful with the spells that you get access to. Enemy creatures within 10 feet of you have disadvantage on saving throws against your paladin spells and channel divinity options. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. What's interesting about this spell, and I feel like a feature that I didn't actually notice before, is it says here, it doesn't say anywhere here that it ends the effect once you're unconscious. Now I'd have to look up the rules to see if there's something I'm missing here, but if it doesn't say here that it ends when you go unconscious, then there's a part of me that thinks that like this can effectively say for 1 minute at the start of your turn you get back up, because that's at the end of the day, at level 20 especially, you're at that point where you're just calculating, can I get my turn? That's all that matters. Health all health is just instances of like how many hits I can take, right? And that's technically true for all levels. But once you get into the later level, your healing is just about keeping you alive long enough for your turn to happen, but then you to effectively immediately fall down again and then get healed up again. And that's especially true for front lines, which you will probably be. And so the idea that effectively this says the healer doesn't have to care about me. At the start of my turn, I will get back up and have my turn. Now, obviously, that's not true for like concentration spells and stuff. They will disappear when you go unconscious. But just being there and being a general debuff until it gets to the enemy's turn and they kill me again, but I get back up again, so it's useless. Every attack they do is almost useless on me. Quite interesting. And when you look at the spells you get access to, Snaring Strike, like not a great example, but like Moonbeam, for example, plant growth, protection from elements, ice storm, stone skin. All of these have a timing restriction of one action. So the idea that you could, for example, bonus action Moonbeam the enemy, getting that damage in, then do your attacks, and then you haven't used an action, just casting a spell when you could be attacking. It allows you to change up how you would do a normal combat from like I cast a spell, put Moonbeam on you, then I run in. Next turn I'll do some attacks. To I run in, I do some attacks, I cast Moonbeam on you, it does the damage, and I've gotten those attacks in. So I think that's very interesting. And then this buff, I quite like that the buff also affects, sorry, the debuff to the enemy of disadvantage on saving throws also works against your channel divinity, because it means that unintentionally, well, completely intentionally, like they've just made these abilities just a lot more powerful when you're in that 20th level form. I worry that when you're at the 20th level, though, that being able to restrain them is going to be borderline impossible, because at that point, a lot of stuff will have very, very, very high strength or dex. And no matter, it's really, really hard, bearing in mind that most of the time, your spellcasting modifier is probably going to be your third priority to level up, because you probably want, and this is the stereotypical paladin, the heavy armored, get into battle, take the hits, deal back a load of damage kind of paladin. But what they'll be focusing on, if they want to just be, I'm not saying this is metagaming it, but this is just generally the stats you want to be high, is you want your strength stat high, because your strength stat is your damage stat, and you want your constitution score quite high, because you want more health to take more hits. And so the third one most of the time will go to charisma. And so even if you, bearing in mind that charisma is probably your third stat, even if you get it to max, which means that you have a +5, you have at that point you have a proficiency bonus of +6. So it's this would be 6. This would be 8 + 6 + 5, right? So it's 8 + 11, and that's 19. 19 for a boss that you'd be fighting at level 20. Even at disadvantage, 19's easy for them to hit. It's not weird for level 20 creatures to have, +12, +13. It's one of those things that they just have to have these ridiculous stats, not for you necessarily, but for what they'll be dealing with from the full casters. And it means that ability, even with it being disadvantage, I don't see this channel divinity getting particular much use. Overall, Oath of the Ancients, I don't mind it. I think it's got the general problem that most of the older subclasses have, which is that it's an old subclass, and so it has this it is weaker because generally for them to make sales, they've had to make subclasses strong because that means people want to play it. It's an annoying part, and I feel like if people realized that instead of it being strong, but it being different enough, that would be enough for them, then it would be fine. But it's sadly not true. Next we have Conquest. Now Conquest I think is a bit more of a newer one. Yeah, a bit more. It's the Xanathar's one. Now this is when they realised that they were sort of missing a trick by not having more evil aligned ones. Technically, you don't have to play this as evil. I mean, you're looking at these a bit tenants and you see like douse the flame of hope, and it makes you think, well, I have to play these evil. Not necessarily. I think you can obviously always take this and change what the tenants are, and you could always have it where maybe you're about conquest, but you're about conquest in the sense that you're about conquering great challenges or conquering great threats to the nation. Like there's ways you can spin it to not be evil, but this is them sort of realizing that they don't need to always do these objectively good paladins, and they can have these sort of like more evil centric ones. So you can sort of see it with some of its abilities as well. Um, Almost all of them have this sort of tinge towards evil. Like Armor of Agathist, is a warlock spell, which a lot of the time are considered evil. You know, command is quite forceful. It's making you do something. Hold person is like restricting people from being able to do stuff. Fear is literally inducing fear. Bestow curse is cursing somebody with a debuff. Dominating a beast, so it's taking over control over them. Dominating a person, literally as the word kill in the word of cloud kill. All of these ones that are hinting towards the more evil side. Overall, the spell selection very very good, very interesting. It works flavorfully, and it gives you decently powerful spells. I mean, spiritual weapon is a very very powerful spell. There's a reason it got quite heavily nerfed in the Unearthed Arcana they did. It's because it's insanely good, but it's like a concentration spell without needing concentration, and it's just that nice little extra bit of damage. I don't think you even mind later levels because it's not costing you too much. Stone Skin again, they keep adding this, and I really just don't think it's a good spell, which is a bit of a shame. Bestow Curse can literally trivialize combats. Depending on what your DM allows, um, it can freaking trivialize combats. Armor of Agathist, very useful, gives you a bit more health, does a bit more damage if they try and hit you. Whole person will come up a decent amount in like, I feel like more in narrative situations, but it isn't bad in combat. Dominate Beast isn't bad, but it's a beast, so it's a beast. You're not gonna see it, especially not when you hit 13th level. Beasts at that point have been edged out of being normally in your games. Cloud Kill's a decently good spell. You are getting it pretty late, but it's not a bad amount of damage. Now we have the Channel Divinity. You can use your Channel Divinity to exude a terrifying presence. As an action, you force each creature of your choice that you can see within 30 feet of you to make a Wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, a creature becomes frightened of you, and for 1 minute, the frightened creature can repeat this for 1 minute. The frightened creature can repeat the save at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on a success. So not bad. It's a bit of it's an AoE frighten, which I think a lot of the time I'm quite low on the frightened condition. Um, one of those ones where it's like they get disadvantage on you when you're in line of sight, so that's okay. It's decent. Um, they can't move willingly closer willingly, which is these abilities aren't bad. I think it is just still one of the weaker conditions, and so I've always just found that whenever something's frightened, except when it happens on us, it doesn't feel too significant. But that's most of the time when we frighten one person. I think the fact that you get this chance of AoEing um, a bunch of creatures, say a pack of goblins, pack of zombies, probably not the zombies. I'd be surprised if you can frighten a zombie. Pack of kobolds, pack of just guards that are coming after you. And statistically, with how many you're hitting, you get like maybe two or three. I think that's the big deal, is that for me, is that a lot of the time when you're using this, you're going to be using it on multiple people. If you're using it on multiple people, at the very least, you'll get some effect out of it. And because of that, I think it's so much more useful than some of the abilities we saw in the Ancient. I have this really big hang up with any sort of ability that I can use, and I don't get a lot of them, and it can succeed, or it can fail and do absolutely nothing. I've said it before, but it's the reason why I lean towards more saving throw based spells, because I absolutely hate it when I'm like, I cast a spell, it misses. I've wasted a spell slot. It's less when I'm playing wizards, if I ever play wizards, sorcerers, clerics, druids, the people with a lot of access to a lot of spells. At that point, I'm a bit more. It's not that big of an effect for me because I'm not actually losing out much because I've got so many other spells. But when I have limited things like this Channel Divinity that you only have one, um, at least at this point you only have one. I'm pretty sure you get another, but I don't see it off the cuff, so I might be thinking of clerics. Even if you have only one, if you use an ability and it does nothing, it feels bad. Guided Strike. You can use your Channel Divinity to strike with supernatural accuracy. When you make an attack roll, you can use your Channel Divinity to give you a +10 bonus. You make this choice after you see the roll, but before the DM says whether it hits or not. That's an interesting ability. I think I like this ability more than you'd expect because it doesn't seem like it has much of an effect, but I feel like it does, just only really narratively. And I keep bringing this up because I'll be honest, I'm increasingly the more I play, and again, this seems like a stupid comment, but it took me a while to realize this. It doesn't matter. All that matters is the role play, really. You're not going to get through the game long enough to see those higher levels if you don't have decent role play. When we've had a decent group that feels like a gelled group, it's gone on for a while, and even in the worst, even when I'm not really feeling up for it, or I'm just not really feeling the story, I'm feeling the party, and so it's not as big of a problem. And this ability, I feel like, works with the narrative. Of course, in combat narrative, in the sense that you can go like, this dude's almost dead. We need to get this final shot in. I'm gonna empower my strike with divine fury, and I'm going to use guided strike, and I'm gonna make sure this hits. And statistically, it will hit. You roll like a 10, you've got a 20. It really boosts you. So overall, I like these two abilities a lot more than I liked Ancient. I think spell-wise, similar to Ancient in terms of useful, in the sense that both of them have quite a useful set of abilities. Aura of Conquest. Starting at 7th level, you can consistently emanate a menacing aura while you're not incapacitated. The aura extends 10 feet from you in every direction, but not through total cover. If a creature is frightened of you, its speed is reduced to 0 while in the aura, and that creature takes psychic damage equal to half your paladin's level if it starts the turn there. The range increases to 30 feet at 18th level. What I really like about this ability is it's turning your Channel Divinity's ability and, like, I guess fear as well, into like part of your like your subclass, like part of your identity, because it goes, okay, now every bit of frightened you do on the enemy, we've improved it. Before you just had basic frightened. Now you have frightened that means they stay in combat. Frightened means you don't have to run after them because they're dashing and you don't get anything much out of it except for the occasional pot shots that are done by your backline and maybe whatever ranged weapon you have as a backup. Now you have it where it's like, no, you stay in combat with everybody, but you've scared out your life, so you got disadvantage. And your speed's nothing, but you still got to try and run. I very much like this ability. Then you have the 15th, level 15 ability. Those who dare to strike you are psychically punished for their audacity. When a creature hits you with an attack, that creature takes psychic damage equal to your charisma modifier, minimum 1, if you're not incapacitated. I don't mind this ability. It's a bit lackluster. I understand that you're obviously getting spells as well and spell slots, so that's why the abilities seem less impactful than some more martial-based abilities. But this one definitely, it's going to be useful. Like, you're going to have situations where people decide to hit you with an attack. They hit you and then just immediately die from being punished. I think I like it as like a little bit of extra bit of damage. It's just it's not going to wow you, and you have waited from freaking 7th level to get a really big wow ability. That's a lot of time, 7th to 15th. So it is a bit disappointing, but I do like the narrative and the actual ability itself. I just wish there was more to it. Finally, you have this transformation. It's called Invincible Conqueror. At 20th level, you gain the ability to harness extraordinary martial prowess. As an action, you can become an avatar of Conquest, gaining the following benefits for 1 minute. You have resistance to all damage. When you take the attack action on your turn, you can make 1 additional attack as part of your action. Your melee weapon attacks score a critical hit on a 19 or a 20. Once you use this feature, you can't use this feature again until you've done a long rest. Now, this ability is quite interesting. So, not only does it give you an extra attack, which is pretty useful because it's just more damage consistently, it also goes, you effectively for a minute have double your health. An ability that people rage about the Barbarian having. Pardon the pun. And you go, yeah, I have that as well for a minute. That's a pretty fancy ability. Also, you just get that ability the champion has as well, where on a 19 or a 20 you score a crit. Not bad. It's not game-breakingly different, but you'll really, really notice this ability, and I think it's much better than the 15th. Overall, I quite like where it goes to in the first 2 abilities, where it heavily starts relying on a condition. But I understand why they didn't go more into that, because there's a lot of things, especially later on, that become immune to frightened. Like, you've heard me say similar things about poisoned before. Well, it's a similar situation, except frightened has obviously a lot less. But a lot of the time, you're dealing with anything elite and any boss, they're probably going to be immune to frightened. just because it's one of those it's one of those conditions that people just it's a really common condition to see, and so they don't want their boss fights or their elites to be trivialized by it, and so a lot of DMs will just give them that. And in fairness, even if fairness to these DMs, even if they even if they didn't decide to give it to them and instead decided to uh use a lot of like uh monsters that come from monster manuals or modules and stuff, they're still gonna get a lot of creatures later on that are just gonna be immune to frightened, and so you're not gonna get too much of a use out of the frightened ability. So I understand why they didn't stay with that, but I feel like the 15th level ability was a very lackluster ability, and I quite like the 20th level ability. Overall, the spells, which I guess are going to be another major part of you, are very, very good and interesting. You'll get use out of almost all of them, except for Stone Skin. And I haven't really used Fear before, but I can see why it's useful with this. I quite like this one. My only complaint with it is probably the 15th level ability not being a big wow ability. But I understand that I'm coming from Monk, where all of its interesting stuff comes from its abilities, and I need to realise that these are half casters, so their abilities aren't going to be as game breaking or like game changing, I guess, as the full martial classes will have. Next, we have Oath of the Crown. Honestly, this Oath of the Crown is the one I've considered going the most. It's just a very interesting like concept, and I quite like. I'm one of those people that is a big fan of finding something in the lore that I really, really like a god, and then basing a cleric on it, or like a kingdom, and then basing a paladin around it, like a knight. Sure, you can do knights as fighters, but the idea of like I've made an oath as a knight to this kingdom, and through it, I've gained divine power to protect these people, is something that I thought was always really cool. And so I've had a lot of ideas for Oath of Crown paladins in the past. In terms of spells, you get a lot of the abilities that you'd sort of expect from somebody who's all about having a commanding presence and making sure to sort of protect like truth and justice, like kind of the Superman idea. So you get command and you get compelled duel, and yet because of what you know about Crown, it's a grey area Crown. You can sort of see them as different in different ways. Like you can have command where it's like tell me the truth or come to jail, and you can have the one where it's like get on your knees and surrender, like or be killed. That kind of like more evil tint to it. I like that this one's a bit more of a grey one. It's stuff like Warding Bond that's very useful. Zone of Truth will come up a decent amount if you're in investigation style things. Or Vitality, it's okay. It allows you to be a bit more of a support for as long as that concentration is up. Spirit Guardians, it's an ability that I've been told by friends that is to be very, very good. I've never tried it before, but it is consistent damage. As you can see, there's a decent amount of concentration spells in Paladin, and you'd think that would be a problem, but you've got a high constitution, and you've got a high AC, and so a lot of the time you're not getting hit, and then when you are getting hit, you've got a good chance of succeeding on the concentrations. And you're sort of going into this realizing, okay, my concentration isn't going to last long, but it might mean that they target me more. So that you have to sort of see it in a different way than the backline would. You got Banishment, very, very useful, both generally and also if you're dealing with anything from another plane. It can just make it so you don't fight it. It's like, okay, this creature's powerful, but maybe it's not a boss, so I haven't given it a legendary resistance. it fails a charisma save because it just happened to roll bad, or I didn't think that this wild extra planar beast should have had a high charisma, and so it's gone, and then it's gone for good, and you never have to deal with it because of how banishment works and stuff that doesn't come from this plane. Guardian of Faith, it's okay. It's consistent damage. You know it's always going to do at least 60 damage. I think it technically can do 70, but you know that you're going to put that down, and it will do 60 damage. If something comes in, you know it'll guarantee 60 damage over probably 3 or 4 turns. Circle of Power, it's not bad. It may come up. I really haven't had much use with this because it's on the higher level of spells. And Geas, it's useful. It's always been a bit confusing to me, but it's like you do this, and if you don't, you take loads of damage. Not bad set of spells. Not much you can really say about them, other than they really fit the theme, no matter which way you go, both good and evil. As a bonus action, sorry, this is the Channel Divinity at 3rd level. As a bonus action, you issue a challenge that compels other creatures to do battle with you. Each creature of your choice that you can see within 30 feet of you must make a Wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, a creature can't willingly move more than 30 feet away from you. The effect ends on the creature if you are incapacitated or die, or if the creature is more than 30 feet away from you. Interesting. So what's interesting about this ability is initially it seems like a compel duel, and it is very, very similar in concept, but what actually it is it's this weird way that I don't know if you've seen with the other subclasses. It's the sort of way they get around doing tanking without explicitly saying you taunt the enemy, which is either you go with the Ancients' way of locking them down so that they only have one person they can get at, which is you directly in front of them. You have the Conquest way, which is you're feared but you can't run away, and so you're in combat with me and you've got disadvantage. And then you've got this one that goes, you can attack other people, sure, but you'll have to get close to them, and you can't willingly move past my 30 feet, which means I can get into combat with you no matter what happens, and constantly make you either disengage or take an opportunity attack. So it's an interesting way they've done it, and I quite like this ability because, again, it's one of those AoE abilities, which means you're probably going to succeed on one of them, and so it won't feel like you've done nothing. The second ability, Turn the Tide. As a bonus action, you can bolster injured creatures with your Channel Divinity. Each creature of your choice that you can hear you within 30 feet of you regains hit points equal to 1d6 plus Charisma modifier, if it is no more than half its hit points. He was doing so good until that final line, I'll be honest. It feels like such an unnecessary ability a little thing to tack onto it. Why does it say if they have no more than half of its hit points? It didn't need that. Overall, it's a nice little bit of a heal that maybe you literally need to turn the tides. The fact that you can use this, and technically you could get a bunch of people that have been knocked incapacitated, because technically they can hear you. They can't respond to you, but they can hear you. And then you just get a bunch of your friends up. Here, have a d6 plus charisma modifier. So it's not going to be a lot, but it doesn't matter how much it is, even if it's 1, because it just means you get the load of people up. I think a lot of the time you'll be using Champion Challenge instead of Turn the Tide, but when you do use Turn the Tide, it will be significant. 7th level, Divine Allegiance. Starting at 7th level, when a creature within 5 feet of you takes damage, you can use your reaction to magically substitute your own health for that of the target, causing that creature not to take damage, instead you take the damage. Damage to you can't be reduced or prevented in any way. So this sort of goes in the line of what I was talking about before, where it's like, how do I tank without objectively just being a tank? And this is another way they're doing it, which is like, okay, I can't taunt you. I can't make it so that you just attack me. I can make it where you can't move away, but I can't make you move away particularly far. But what I can do is I can make sure that if you try and hit someone else, there's a chance I can just take the damage anyway and be a tank. I think it's a cool ability. I think the only real problem with it is there's a lot of abilities similar to it that you can get via fighting styles. And now, because of how fighting styles work, you can get via feats that I think do a very similar thing much earlier on. And you know, you don't have to take this subclass. It sort of negates this ability. It doesn't make you unique in any way. Finally, well, not finally, 15th level ability. You have advantage on saving throws to avoid being paralyzed or stunned. Now, sure, when you're about to be paralyzed or you're about to be stunned, this is going to be useful. Does feel like a bit of a lackluster ability though. And I feel like this is becoming a repeated thing for Paladin, where the 15th level ability, where you've had a solid while since you got an ability, between 7th and 15th is 8 levels. Like, the next one takes 5, which is a 3 left, and before 7th, it took like 4. It's the longest jump that you have to do with getting subclass features. And to just get this ability that very rarely comes up, and when it does come up, it's not going to make you feel like, oh cool, I'm unique and I'm awesome, I got this cool ability. It's just, yeah, I roll 2 die. You might even forget it, because how often is it going to come up? I mean, not being stunned and paralyzed is very useful. Paralyzed and stunned are like 2 of the best status effects. So you won't hate it when it comes up, but it just, to me, feels a bit boring. Exalted Champion. At 20th level, your presence on the field of battle is an inspiration to those dedicated to your cause. You can use an action to gain the following benefits for 1 hour. You have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons, almost useless. Your allies have advantage on death saves while they're within 30 feet of you. Not bad, means you're more likely to roll a 20 and get back up again. I think that might be like a pseudo homebrew rule, but I love that ability. I love that thing in my games where it's just if you roll a 20 on a death save, you're just up with 1 health. You have this fucking second wind. It's so useful. You have advantage on wisdom saving throws, as do allies within 30 feet of you. Not bad. Mean a lot of spells, especially ones that manipulate the mind, decide to go with wisdom. So a lot of charm effects, a lot of frightened effects, a lot of psychic damage based saving throws will have something like that. And then it has this effect ends early if you are incapacitated or die. I think this one is not. It's a bit lackluster. You get a sort of resistance to damage, but it's a damage type that is never going to really come up when you're at that level. The only way this will come up is you do that thing. If you do a situation where a bunch of people are attacking you, they don't realize who they're dealing with, and so you just put this incredible form on. I don't know what you'd have it as. I kind of see it as like the crown like appearing behind you, or like the holy symbol of the symbol of the kingdom you represent appearing behind you, and you sort of glowing with divine effects or something. And then they hit you, and it's doing it narratively it's doing like, it doesn't look like it's doing any damage to you, but actually it's doing like one or two because they have like a d6 damage, and you're then halving that, and the half the time then, well, more than half the time they're just not even hitting. Um, the allies having advantage of death saves, it'll come up a lot because a lot of fights, especially at that level, are going to be in a situation where you're just going like, okay, healer, get this person up so that they can have their turn. You get this person up, and they try and get everyone up, but obviously it's always going to be a bit of a. It's going to be an impossible feat to always get everybody up, and so having something here where it's like, okay, we've got a higher chance now of. It's a 1 in 10 chance that we just get up again naturally. And the wisdom saving throw thing, as I said, it's a relatively common saving throw to ask to do. So it's not too bad. I think it's bad when you compare this super form to Conquest's super form, because this one says it has resistance to a type of damage, but realistically, that ability could not exist. And then Conquest goes, no, I have resistance to everything. Overall, Crown, I love the concept behind it. I don't think the spells are that good. They're not bad, they're a bit supporty. I like the way it goes in making you more tanky. I worry that because Champion Challenge is a Channel Divinity, it's not going to be as useful. As people, like, it's not going to be as useful because you're not going to get very many uses out of it. I do think that notably this comes back on a short rest, and so you may be able to use this a decent amount of times. But for it to be your main way of tanking is a bit of a shame that it's just you only get one use. I like the 7th level ability. I think it's quite useful at tanking, but I don't think it's unique. The 15th level ability is probably the most disappointing I've seen at the moment. And the 20th level ability is just... It's beaten, in my opinion, by the other two we've seen. By a long shot. Especially with Conquest. I still think it loses out to Ancients as well. Next is Devotion Paladin. Kind of the Paladin I consider the generic Paladin. Now, I'm not using generic in a bad sense, of course, but it's the one that you think of when you think of a Paladin. It's the one that I think is used a lot to show off a Paladin that is specifically a Paladin to a god. Which you don't have to be, even though you'd kind of expect it to be. But this is the one that they think of. Overall, its abilities. Protection from evil and good is a very useful ability, and making sure you always have that, it's not bad. Sanctuary, it can come up. It means that you can put this on somebody and go, well, every time you try and hit them, roll a dice. Oh, you failed? Well, that means you can't attack them. Instead, maybe you attack me instead. Lesser Restoration, it'll come up occasionally. I've only really ever used it narratively, but I could see in longer fights, maybe later on the higher levels, having like a really deliberating ability on them. Say they're paralyzed and you need them to have that turn, sacrificing your turn and the spell to make it so they have a turn. I could see coming up. Zone of Truth, as I said before, it's decent narratively, used to like interrogate or to make sure that people can sort of trust you. Although again, they only take your word on you using the Zone of Truth, and they don't know whether you're actually being true or not. But there are uses to it in case you're like trying to learn if somebody's worth is like if they're not going to betray you in any capacity. Beacon of Hope, I don't think is particularly useful. I mean, the fact that you can regain the maximum number of hit points is pretty useful. Because that when you know you're getting maximum on stuff, it does change the sort of slightly changes how healing works, in my opinion, in the sense that it becomes slightly less about like it becomes slightly less about how many hits I can take and more about, okay, I can actually heal people up so that they can take multiple hits now, because I can guarantee that whenever I roll cure wounds at like a high level or something, I'm going to get max. Dispel magic, it will come up both in and out of combat. It's very useful to have. Freedom of movement, not bad. I don't know how useful it is at that level though. I feel like it's not that good. Guardian of Faith, very useful ability. I mentioned it before. Guarantees 60 damage. Commune, again, narrative ability. You have to be very specific to get anything from it. I don't particularly think it's a great spell. And Flame Strike is just worse fireball. So you're getting a worse fireball at 17th level. So it's not great, but it's an AoE. So at the end of the day, AoEs are a lot easier to get worth out of because you can hit multiple people, which means the damage is effectively, times by how many people you hit. So obviously 4d6 and fire and 4d6 radiant isn't that good at 17th level. But what if I was like, I hit 4 people with it? Well, now that doesn't say 4d6 fire and 4d6 radiant. That says 4d6 times 4 fire and 4d6 times 4 radiant. And then it becomes quite useful. Channel Divinity. As an action, you can imbue one weapon that you are holding with positive energy. Using your Channel Divinity. For 1 minute, you add your Charisma modifier to attack rolls made with that weapon. The weapon also emits bright light in 20 foot radius and dim light in 20 foot beyond that. If the weapon is not already magical, it becomes magical. You can end this effect on your turn as a part of any other action. If you're no longer holding or carrying the weapon, or if you fall unconscious, the effect ends. This isn't bad early on, because it just goes, and you could come across these. It go early on. You could be in a situation where you're dealing with something that has resistance to non-magical weaponry, and you're in a situation where you haven't gotten to the point now where you have access to magical weaponry. They haven't been given to you by a DM yet. And this goes, okay, I can actually, this ability has some use now. I can hit them and I'm doing full damage. It's effectively like I'm doing double damage. In addition, I'm getting an extra plus 2 realistically onto each of my attacks, so they're more likely to hit. Both of those are very useful abilities, honestly. I worry that this ability, even when you have max Charisma modifier, so a +5, getting a +5 to your hits for a minute, not as good when you're getting to the later levels. So I feel like this falls off a bit. Turn the Unholy. As an action, you present your holy symbol and seek prayer. Censuring? I feel like that should be censoring, but I don't think that's how you spell it. Fiends and undead. Using your Channel Divinity. Each fiend or undead that you can see or hear within 30 feet of you must succeed on a wisdom saving throw. If it's failed, it is turned. Willingly move. Action, it can only... If there's nowhere to move, it takes the dodge action. Okay, so it's very similar to what we saw before, but before it was Fiend and Fey. This one is Fiend and Undead. I believe, and I could be completely wrong here, that this is the same as the Cleric's Turn Undead, except without any of the extra bonuses that you'll get later. Not bad. I'd say the same thing I'd say about Cleric, which is I feel like it gets almost no use. And its ability that I feel like, even though I've played a Cleric for a decently long time, I didn't use even once. Now, if you're in a situation where you're dealing with a lot of undead as in your campaign, maybe this gets some use occasionally. In general, undead probably don't have a particularly high wisdom. I personally just haven't been in a situation where it's had much use. I do think though that ability, because there's no restriction on what kind of undead you can use it on, because it has that no restriction like that, I feel like this will get some use. Get some use in a variety of situations. I think it's also better at scaling than you would normally get from your sacred weapon, definitely. So I think you'll be using this lot more often the longer you get in, assuming you're dealing with undead. Awe of Devotion. Starting at 7th level, you and friendly creatures within 10 feet of you can't be charmed while you are conscious. Increases to 30 feet later on. So it's another one of these auras, and I think this aura is not bad. I do feel though, and again, I could be spoiled because I just did Monk, but this ability is so freaking boring. I know auras are the thing of paladins, but it's just an ability that I feel I'm not a big fan of abilities that, sure, you will see in play, but narratively they don't have much weight to them. And this is a very similar ability in the sense that, what does this ability look like when you're watching it being done in your game? It'll be a situation where somebody casts Charm Person on one of your friends, and it just doesn't succeed, and that's the end of it. You can spice it up with some narrative and go like, the Archfey tries to use its arcane knowledge and magic to manipulate your mind to be more susceptible to their decisions. And sure, the flavor there is not bad, but like your pure aura protects your friends from its influence. It's a cool little narrative thing, but I just feel like you get more out of it when it's like an ability that you can do, or a passive ability that fundamentally changes how you do something. Like the Frightened one that we saw with Conquest, which went, okay, now Frightened is completely different. So I don't particularly like it. Fitting in at 15th level, you're always under the effects of Protection from Evil and Good spell. That is insane. That's probably the best 15th level ability I've seen at the moment. Because Protection from Evil and Good, as I said before, is very useful. Effectively goes, hey, Aberration, Celestials, Elemental, Fey, Fiend, and Undead. All of you can attack me, but you have disadvantage. I also can't be charmed or frightened by you. Or possessed. That might come up. It's huge. It's effectively going, I'm so good at you fighting you guys, and you can't get rid of this because I'm always under the effect. That's very, very good. I quite like that ability. Holy Nimbus. At 20th level, as an action, you can emanate an aura of sunlight. For 1 minute, bright light shines from you in a 30-foot radius, and dim light shines 30 foot beyond that. Whenever a creature starts its turn in bright light, the creature takes 10 radiant damage. In addition, for the duration you have advantage on saving throws against spells cast by fiends, or undead. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. Now notably, there's only really 2 effects there, because the bright light, I always sort of dismiss anything that produces light, because a lot of the time you'll be dealing with a majority party that has dark vision. Because almost every species has dark vision, except for human and dragonborn. So that line is almost useless there, except for like narrative and the fact that you've kind of effectively become an angel, very briefly. The idea that they take 10 damage whenever they're in your bright light, it's a cool little ability. It's very similar to what the Ancient had, where it healed 10 every turn, except arguably the healing's better. Because 10 damage, it's not a huge amount, especially at 20th level. Even creatures you'll be dealing with that are like the hordes at that level are going to be hordes of creatures that have like 60 health. Like, at minimum, maybe 30 health. And doing that extra 10 damage, sure, it's a third of their health. But what more you want to do is you make sure you stay in combat and make sure that you are tanking for the people who can do more damage. Because sure, you have that instant smite, that you have the instant damage that's better than almost anybody. But once you finish that, or once you're not planning on using that because you're saving it for a bigger threat, you're there to tank. And that ability to me isn't great. Overall, Devotion Paladin gets access to a decent amount of spells. Some of them are very useful. Protection from Evil and Good, Sanctuary, Dispel Magic, or Zone of Truth. All of these will get some use. Guardian of Faith isn't bad either. Channel Divinities are something that's very decent early on in the Sacred Weapon, and one that you probably use later in the Turn the Holy, but even though you'll use this one more later, you probably aren't going to get too much of a use out of them. I think it's okay, it's not great. You have an Aura that's a bit lackluster in my opinion. You have a 15th level ability that I think is one of the best 15th level abilities we've seen. It's not saying much, because I think 15th level is where they have the biggest dip in the Paladin, in my opinion. But it's still a very, very good ability. And then the 20th level ability is not great. It's not horrendous. It's not like crown like level, but it's not great. I think what I find with, at least with the ones I've seen and the bit I've looked at with Paladins before, is I feel like they are one of those classes that really does well when you multi-class it, because I really don't like its final abilities. I don't feel like the fact you're getting fifth level spells makes up for that, in my opinion. But again, there's a reason I try to emphasize this, but I am not very, very good at reviewing like power level, and at the end of the day, this is only my opinion on this stuff. Glory, Oath of Glory. Now I remember this one being in the Theros book, and then I think it was added again in the Tasha's book into effectively being an actual subclass, because technically before it wasn't one. Because the Magic the Gathering books and like a couple other books are kind of like pseudo official, but not really. Does it say it there? Yeah, cool. Theros. Spells. It has a decent amount of spells. Oh, by the way, I should probably explain what this kind of oath is about. Oath of Glory is generally the oath for. I saw it initially as being the oath of somebody that is just starving for fame, but it can also be done as kind of like the generic sort of hero you would see in like Greek stories. So your Heracles, your fuck, why did I just go blank on a bunch of other heroes' names? Like, the people in the Odyssey, you know, like is it Jason and the Argonauts? Is that what they're called? God, I'm gonna be so annoyed with myself at later on when I come up with all these names. But that Greek hero sort of idea. There's sort of two ways you can go. I always thought of it with the more evil way of like they're just starving for attention. But there's many ways you can go with it, as I said. Spells wise, Guiding Bolt, very, very useful. It's a decently powerful spell. Also has a decent additional effect. Heroism, it's not bad. I initially wasn't really a big fan of it. The fact that you can have yourself a little bit extra temp health, make yourself immune to frightened. I don't know how useful the frightened ability comes up, but the extra health is not bad. Enhance ability maybe comes up in out of combat, but I don't think you're using that in combat. Magic weapon, I don't really rate that highly. I guess if you're in a situation where you don't have a magical weapon, but they have like resistance to non-magical, then this is useful. Haste, very very useful. Does come with a bit of a problem with it, where you effectively get like paralyzed for a turn after you get knocked out of it. But for the turns you do, you're probably getting a lot out of it. Protection from the elements, protection from energy, sorry, is an ability that I don't feel there being much use out of, unless you know exactly what you're going up against. So, like, if you're going against an elemental evil cult or something, you would know, like, okay, these are the fire elemental evil cults of fire. I'm gonna just cast this on myself, just because I generally think they're gonna be doing fire damage. Compulsion, it's not bad. I think it's a bit out of place actually in these lists of abilities, because it wasn't really going down the route of manipulating other people, and this one kind of is, but I don't mind it. It's a decent ability. Freedom of movement, I'm not a big fan of, but it's not bad. Commune, again, it's a decent narrative decision, but not like narrative spell, but I don't know how much I get use out of it. And Flame Strike, like I said for the other one, it's kind of just worse Fireball. But because it's an AoE anyway and it does decent amount of damage, you're probably going to get some use out of it. I feel like a lot of the time, the spell slot you'd use for Flame Strike, you'll use instead for Smite. Channel Divinity abilities. Peerless Athlete. As a bonus action, you expend your Channel Divinity to augment your athleticism. For the next 10 minutes, you have advantage on athletic checks, acrobatic checks. You can push, carry, drag, and lift twice as much weight as normal, and the distance of your long or high jump increases by 10 feet. Interesting ability. I feel like you'll see this ability a lot more as kind of an out of combat ability, because I don't see any inherent use for this, except for, I guess, maybe getting out of grapple. Like, if someone grapples you, you can use acrobatics to get out of it, I guess. Or I guess if you're grappling someone, you could use athletics to grapple them. I guess there's some interesting things you can do with the idea of being able to carry heavier stuff. Like, you could drop something really heavy on an enemy or something. If you're chasing someone, the idea that you can jump, your base high jump or your base long jump is 10 feet is not insignificant, because your long jump normally isn't that particularly high, so having that is not too bad. Overall, I don't mind the ability, because I think it's decent out of combat. Yeah, I don't mind the ability. Then there's an Inspiring Smite. Immediately after you deal damage to a creature with your Divine Smite feature, you can use your Channel Divinity as a bonus action and distribute temporary hit points to creatures of your choice within 30 feet of you, which can include you. The total number of temporary hit points equal 2d8 plus your level in this class, divided among the chosen creatures however you like. So my understanding of this is you can choose any number of creatures of your choice within 30 feet of you, and then you roll a dice and you get 2d8 plus your level, and you add that to everyone. Or is it that you roll a dice and you take that number and you can distribute that amount of temp hit points to everybody within 30 feet of you? I feel like this is good if I go with the first explanation, where you give this number of temp hit points to everybody, but it isn't great at all if we go with the second one. I'm going to assume, because of when this came out, and because I believe that's how it's supposed to be read. You roll the dice of 2d8 plus your level, and then you distribute that number to everybody you want within 30 feet. If that's true, this is a very cool ability, especially early on. Just give everybody a little bit of extra health, make sure they can maybe take a hit. I think that's a great ability to have. Aura of Alacrity? I don't know that name or how to say it, but it's that aura. It's a 7th level ability. You emanate an aura that fills you and your companions with supernatural speed, allowing you to race across a battlefield in formation. Your walking speed increases by 10 feet. In addition, if you aren't incapacitated, the walking speed of any ally who starts their turn within 5 feet of you increases by 10 feet until the end of the turn. Increases at 18th level, the range of the aura increases to 10 feet. Okay. So anyone that starts their turn next to you, like you're in a formation, gets that little bit of extra boost to their speed. I think that's quite useful for situations where you have another front line that's properly a front line. And by that I mean somebody who's there to tank like you, like a barbarian or a fighter, or maybe like a forge cleric or something, one of the ones that gets heavy armor. And not like a damage dealer, like what I believe a rogue to be, or maybe a dual weaponed fighter or ranger, where they're there to do a lot of damage, but maybe not to take as many hits. Although they do have a lot of health, but they don't have abilities. I think it's a cool ability. I think it's a lot cooler than a lot of other auras that I've seen because it has a noticeable effect on the battlefield at all points. Whereas before, with some of the other ones, it's just been like, oh, you're immune to charmed. Like, it's not been like a visual thing you can see in the game. Glorious Defense, 15th level ability. You can turn defense into a sudden strike. When you or another creature you can see within 10 feet of you is hit by an attack roll, you can use your reaction to gain a bonus to the. You can use your reaction to grant a bonus to the target's AC against that attack, potentially causing it to miss. The bonus is equal to your charisma modifier, which at 15th level is probably +3 or +4. The attack misses. You can make one weapon attack against the attacker as part of the reaction, provided this attack is within your attack range. You use this feature at number of times equal to your charisma modifier, minimum of once, and you regain them all when you finish a long rest. I don't mind this ability. A lot of the time, even if you're not trying to metagame, you'll sort of figure out if you fought a creature a lot, like the same sort of creature, or if you're in a long form boss battle with something, you'll sort of figure out around what you need to, like, around what they do and, like, generally their stats, right? And so this ability is quite interesting because it goes, I don't know why you'd ever use this ability without knowing, actually, now that I think about it, without knowing that whether you're gonna make it hit or not, whether you're gonna make it miss or not. I mean, because you'll know your ally's AC, and you'll know what your modifier is, so you'll know if you can reaction make it so it misses. So I think every situation when you use this reaction, you're going to get that extra attack, which I actually, now that I've thought it through and talked it through, I quite like this ability. It's effectively saying 3 to 4 times, depending on what your charisma modifier is at the moment, 3 to 4 times in a battle, you can go, you miss, and I hit you. Well, I attack you. Which I think is quite cool, because there's a pretty decent tempo swing. If you can make later on, say a dragon, or like another creature that does a lot of damage with an attack, miss on their turn, like, that's huge. That's the difference between maybe like 20 damage, maybe 30 damage, depending on what kind of dude you're fighting. It could be 50 damage. So yeah, I quite like that ability. And then finally you get Living Legend. You empower yourself with the legends, whether true or exaggerated, of your great deeds. As a bonus action, you gain the following benefits for 1 minute. You are blessed with an otherworldly presence. Gain advantage on all charisma checks. Not a bad ability, although a lot of the time you probably want to be using this in combat, in which case charisma checks aren't going to be that useful. Once on each of your turns, when you make a weapon attack and miss, you can cause the attack to hit instead. Actually quite useful, because it means that a lot of the time, statistically, one of them's going to miss, and just getting that little bit of extra damage by saying no, it hits, it will add up. If you fail a saving throw, you can use reaction to re-roll it. You may use this new roll. That's very useful. That's a very, very useful ability, because you want to be keeping concentration on your spells, and you don't have that many spells, and so in these situations where you're going to lose like concentration on it, having this other ability that can potentially make it so you keep it at least another turn, it's huge. Because that's the thing with half-casters that you'll see, because a lot of them are coming up actually in my ramblings. You have very limited spells, and so you want your spells to go a long way. You want them to be a situation where they debuff somebody for a long time, or they're consistent damage on somebody. And you want them to stay, and so when you're taking attacks like this, because you're at the end of the day with the Paladin at the very least, you're in the front line, so you will be taking attacks. And so the idea that you can just go, hey, that attack, it hit me, it made me do a roll, I failed, I re-rolled, I no longer fail, is huge. And actually, what I saw it and I didn't voice it, but this is a notable exception that you're seeing on what I believe to be, if not one of, the latest Paladin that came out. And you can see it because it has this ability. It says, once you use this feature, you can't use it until you finish a long rest, unless you spend a 5th level spell slot to use it again. This is huge. This means it's not a one-time thing. If you have yourself one of these spare 5th level spell slots, you have 2 of them, and they're decent for smites, but for spells, a lot of the spells will have already gotten to the point where they're sort of being outdone by like the damage both you can do or what you could make other people do by keeping them alive. If you can then go, I can use one of these to just get myself another attack, like make myself guarantee another attack on, or make my concentration thing able to re-roll. It's huge. That's a huge change to a Paladin, and that's why I think this one's very, very good. I like its 2 channel divinities, one of them focusing more of out of combat, one of them focusing more in combat. The aura has a notable effect on stuff, which is a lot different to some of the other auras. I think the only one that I remember off the top of my head, because I've got a bad memory even though I just started reviewing them of the auras, because a lot of them are a bit forgettable, is the aura of the Oath of Conquest, which that one had a notable effect because it changed your frightened to being a frightened that meant they couldn't move. This one has a notable effect on the battlefield because it goes, hey, have this fucking speed boost. Get into their back line. Get over there to defend our back line. You know, it's useful. The Glorious Defense is a very interesting ability that will come up and will mean that, like, effectively what you're doing here by making them miss is just you're kind of healing your friends by making it so they don't get hit, and you're getting that little extra bit of like a little bit of extra damage, which you can use your smite on, notably. And then Living Legend, although not being the most powerful of the auras of the like transformations we've seen, the fact that it has this, you can get it back on a 5th level, makes it very, very, very good. Overall, Glory's great. Oathbreaker. Now, Oathbreaker's an interesting one because Oathbreaker implies that you previously had an oath and you've now broken it. So it's one of those ones it's sort of a subclass that a lot of people will like only take if they're in a situation where they've played a paladin and the paladin doesn't believe in what they used to believe in before. You can technically start out as one. There's no reason to say you can't. Just the thing is that in the game, at least the base setting, it means you're being hunted by something. Like probably a paladin order, maybe even the angelic creatures. Overall, this was the OG evil paladin. What's interesting about it is it's technically, if I remember correctly, there was the base subclasses, and then there was this one. There was a little extra one you got in the player's handbook. I say player's handbook, actually it comes from the Dungeon Master's Guide, but which makes sense because it's more of a DM tool, this class. But this was like a little extra one because it's kind of like you're not really supposed to, under normal circumstances, play it. As you can see, its abilities are very heavily evil aligned. Warlock spells like Hellish Rebuke, inflict wounds, so like straight up damaging spells. All the spells have some evil connotations to them. All of them are actually very useful spells. Hellish Rebuke is very useful. Inflict wounds does a lot of damage for the level it is. Crown of Madness is a really interesting ability. Darkness isn't great. Darkness isn't a great spell in general. Animate Dead, not a bad spell, very, very useful. Bestow Curse, as I said before, can literally change a fight completely. Blight does a lot of damage. Even later on, you're fine with casting Blight. Confusion, it messes up a group. Which isn't bad. Contagion is an interesting ability that sadly has the word poisoned on it, which is always a problem to have and stuff. But the fact that it has all these cool little like added things you can have, they're cool. I like them. They can really screw over a boss if you can get it off. And Dominate Person's always useful in and out of combat. Its channel divinities are quite interesting because one of them, for example, is Control Undead. As an action, the Paladin targets one undead creature he or she can see within 30 feet of him or her. The target must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the target must obey the Paladin's command for the next 24 hours, or until the Paladin uses the channel divinity option again. An undead whose challenge rating is equal or greater than the Paladin's level is immune to this effect. Now this seems like that last line kind of fucks you over, but not really. Because if you think about it, the average, say, elite enemy you're dealing with in an undead themed sort of dungeon, the elite is going to be a lower challenge rating than you because it'll be the elite and a bunch of little guys, right? So the idea that you can get yourself an elite on your side, it's not insignificant. That could change the outcome of a fight. Because that's a dude there that is just completely under your control. That's extra health, that's extra damage every turn. That effectively kills one of their enemies. One of your enemies, because it just takes one of them out of commission for them and puts it on your side. So this move fundamentally could change a fight from being, say, like a 10v4 to now a 9v5, which it doesn't sound like much, but when you're looking at it, that does change a fair amount. There is the obvious problem of if you're in a situation where you're not dealing with undead, this channel divinity is useless. But hopefully this other channel affinity is what you fall back on if that one doesn't work. Dreadful aspect. As an action, the Paladin channels the darkest emotions and focuses them into a burst of magical menace. Each creature of the Paladin's choice within 30 feet of the Paladin must make a Wisdom saving throw. If it can see the Paladin. On a failed save, the target is frightened of the Paladin for 1 minute. If a creature frightened by this effect ends its turn more than 30 feet away from the Paladin, it can attempt another Wisdom saving throw to end the effect on it. What's interesting about this ability is we've seen this not exact ability, we've seen a similar ability on the Conquest Paladin. And that was an AoE frighten, but it didn't say that last line where it can only make the effect if it's more than 30 feet away from you. Which makes sense, because it would be overpowered if it said that, because you also get something later that's like they can't move when they're frightened. So I understand why that ability isn't on the Conquest Paladin, but in most contexts, in most situations, I feel like the Conquest Paladin just does this better. And I feel like this ability is a bit disappointing. Now, it can be, in Magical Christmas Land, where everything goes well, it could be a frightened ability that is constant and they can't even make saves to get away from it. But realistically, they run away at max speed, they have to use their dash, and they dash away, they're going to dash more than 30 feet. And then the only way you're going to be able to keep that working is if you can somehow restrict their movement. Because they'll end their turn more than 30 feet away from you if they are frightened, because they will dash and they will move. And that dash and move will be more than 30 feet most of the time, unless you're dealing with, like, I don't know, like a snail, like a giant snail. And even a giant snail probably has more than 30 feet movement when it dashes. So I feel like this ability effectively says, creature makes a wisdom save. If it fails, you get an attack of opportunity on them. And they run away. They have attack of opportunity on you, and they use their turn running away, then they make a save. I don't think it's a particularly good ability. I like Control Undead for when you're in an undead situation. I don't think its Dreadful Aspect is a particularly good ability. Awe of Hate. Starting at 7th level, the Paladin, as well as any fiends and undead within 10 feet of the Paladin, gain a bonus to melee weapon damage rolls equal to the Paladin's Charisma modifier. A creature can benefit from this feature from only one Paladin at a time, and the range increases to 30 feet at 18th level. So what's interesting about this, and what is probably the first thing you saw when you looked at this, was it says as well as any fiends and undead within 10 feet of you. So if you're fighting undead or fiends, this ability effectively just says both sides get a bonus to their melee weapon damage rolls. What is also notable about this is that you get the spell Animate Dead, which does mean that if you're in a situation where you animate dead, you animate a bunch of skeletons to fight with you, they get this bonus to their damage as well, which is notable. This aura, in my opinion, is very similar to many of the other auras in the sense that it's the idea that they've gone for paladins is that they all have this aura. Pardon me. I personally believe that these auras most of the time are boring unless they have an active effect, and I've been saying that since the start. And this one doesn't really, to me, have an effect that changes the battlefield completely. I think all that's going to come out of this is most of the time you're doing extra damage to the enemy, and then the occasional times everyone has a bit of a chuckle because you've actually helped the enemy in addition to helping yourself. And that's really what's going to happen here. I'm just going to do a bit of a refresh of the page because it keeps... I feel like there's maybe a problem with what I'm using here. Because I've never had this happen before, but I constantly have to refresh now. As if like maybe there's a problem with the program. Anyway, yeah, I think this ability doesn't impact the battlefield much, and so I'm not a big fan of it. 15th level. The Paladin gains resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons. This is the worst ability that any Paladin gets at 15th level. Straight up. I've gone on record before as saying this line of text is borderline useless unless you get it at 2nd level. Unless you get it like early on, this line of text is useless. In my experience, things that I've fought at much lower levels than this have had their basic minions have magical attacks. And I believe that to be the norm for games until I play something that says otherwise, frankly. So 15th level ability is absolutely useless in my opinion. 20th level ability, Dreadlord. The Paladin can, as an action, surround himself or herself with an aura of gloom that lasts for 1 minute. The aura reduces any bright light in a 30-foot radius around the Paladin to dim light. Whenever a creature that is frightened by the Paladin starts its turn in the aura, it takes 4d10 psychic damage. Additionally, the Paladin and creature he or she chooses in the area are draped in deeper shadow. Oh, and creatures, sorry. So it can be your whole party effectively. Creatures that rely on sight have disadvantage on attack rolls against creatures draped in the shadow. Now that's an interesting ability because I'm not sure what that really means. Because it says creatures that rely on sight. Now, does that mean normal sight, or does that mean sight in general? Like, does this affect anybody that doesn't use, like, echolocation or tremor sense? Or does this mean if you have rely on normal sight, you get disadvantage on them? If that means that it's anything that doesn't rely on tremor sense or like another sense other than sight to see, then it's a really good ability. Because it effectively is an aura of disadvantage on attack rolls against us. If that means relying on normal senses, this is a useless ability. Because everything will have another sense at that point. In my opinion. Every fiend, every archfey, every elemental, every celestial that you'll be fighting at that level will have it. Most aberrations and monstrosities will. Maybe if you're fighting humans that are just incredibly skilled fighters, they might not have it. But even then, I believe they'd have blind sense of some variety if they're that skilled in combat. And I just chalk it up to like fighter's instinct or reflexes. The idea that if you're frightened and you're within range of it, you take a load of damage. I could see that being useful in most situations if it was earlier on. I worry that a lot of things at this level gain immunity to these abilities. And if not immunity, significant disadvantage to them. Significant advantage against them is more what I mean. I wonder how often that'll come up, but I guess having the extra 4d10 damage when it does come up is not bad. Also, it has, while the aura lasts, the paladin can use a bonus action on his or her turn to cause the shadows in the aura to attack one creature. Makes a melee spell attack against the target. If the target hits, they take 3d10 plus charisma modifier. That's decent. You get a powerful attack that's a bonus action that you can do every turn. That's useful. Overall, this Dreadlord ability has a niche ability around Frightened that I don't think will come up too much at that level. It has ability that I think may never come up depending on how you read it, and a really decent bonus action attack. Overall, for Oathbreaker, I think it's showing its age like a lot of these are. I think it's not bad. It's just not. It doesn't have a lot of the common conveniences you'll get from the newer ones that I think it only really help the paladin. The Control Undead is a very interesting ability that I don't think you'd see in newer classes, because it's potentially like it could warp a fight. I think that's a really cool ability. The problem is it's got those restriction of being undead. I know why it has it. It just means that it doesn't get use in probably 90% of your battles, unless your campaign is literally focused around a big powerful undead and mostly undead. And this dreadful aspect is is, in my opinion, just a weaker version of the Conquest's ability. The spells it gets access to are quite good, I will say. The aura is, in my opinion, a bit boring, except for the occasional chuckle you get in your party when it's like, hey, you're buffing our enemy. That 15th level ability is borderline useless, and the Dreadlord ability has one niche ability, one useless ability, and one decent ability. Overall, I don't rate the Oathbreaker that much. I don't like the fact that statistically, I could choose the to go Oathbreaker and effectively become weaker, which I don't think is how it should be. I think how it should be is that the whole point is you sacrifice your morals for power. Open Sea. Now, Open Sea might actually be the newest one because I believe it came from the Matt Mercer one. Yes, the Tal'Dorei one. This one conceptually is really interesting because I kind of see it as like, oh yeah, what kind of codes exist? Oh shit, the pirate code exists. Let's do some stuff with that. So I quite like that conceptually. The spells narratively make a load of sense. Create, destroy water. When you realise that this one's supposed to be very maneuverable, a lot of the spells make sense. They're all water-based or maneuverable spells and stuff. Create and destroy water really only is a narrative ability, and I don't even think it comes up that much, even when it is a narrative ability. Expeditious retreat is useful for the sort of fast paladin that you're going for. Augur's okay. Bit of a narrative ability. It'd be cool to use in a situation, but I don't rate it incredibly highly. Misty Step's always good. Call Lightning's a nice consistent amount of damage. Freedom of the Waves is a spell I don't really know because it's one that he added, but it's a decent AoE spell from what I can see that uses Strength Save, which is rare. Control Water I don't rate particularly highly. I mean, you can make a whirlpool, you can redirect flow. I don't see it particularly decent. Freedom of Movement I don't rate. Commune with Nature I don't rate that highly either. Freedom of the Wind is okay. I think generally the spell list is kind of on the lower side. I rate Call Lightning, I rate Misty Step, I rate Expeditious Retreat, and that's really it. Channel Divinities, it gets at 3rd level, it gets Marine Layer. As an action, you can channel the sea to create a thick cloud of fog that surrounds you that surrounds you for 20 feet in all directions. The fog moves with you, remaining centered on you and making its area heavily obscured. You and each creature within 5 feet of you instead treat the area as lightly obscured. The aura lasts for 10 minutes, spreads around corners, and cannot be dispersed unless you choose to end the effect. I like this ability. It's just like a moving, obscuring like fog that you and your allies are perfectly fine in, as long as you're within 5 feet. It's a cool ability to sort of get closer to enemies without them being able to hurt you as much. It means that when they try and attack you, they have disadvantage from what I can see in this rules tip, and you have advantage on those spells, which is quite interesting. It arguably makes it possible for you to maybe do a ranged paladin build a bit more, which is quite interesting. Another one of its spells is Fury of the Tides. As a bonus action, you can channel the powerful might of the waves to bolster your attacks for 1 minute. Once per turn, for the duration, when you hit a creature with a weapon attack, you can choose to push the target 10 feet away from you. If pushed into an obstacle or another creature, the target takes bludgeoning damage equal to your charisma modifier. A pretty interesting ability. I talked about this with other pushing abilities, with other subclasses in previous episodes, but being able to push stuff will come up as being a very useful ability. Pushing people into lava, pushing people into spikes, pushing people into the areas of other people's spells, for example. Pushing abilities are always quite good. In general, I like both of these abilities because they both have cool uses, and in general, they're just useful even when you don't use them in specific situations. Aura of Liberation. Starting at 7th level, you fill nearby creatures with energy of movement. While not incapacitated, you and creatures of your choice within 10 feet of you cannot be grappled or restrained, and ignore penalties on movement and attacks while underwater. Creatures that are already grappled or restrained when they enter the aura can spend 5 feet of their movement to escape automatically unless they are bound by magical restraints. This isn't a bad ability. I'm just going to be saying the same thing as I said before. How often are you in a situation where you're grappled? When that happens, you'll be happy that this person has this aura. How often are you underwater? Very rarely. But when you are, you'll be happy that they have this. How often are you restrained? Probably more than the other two. Like, I believe that one will come up. And you'll be happy for this ability. My problem is, I've been playing, and this is just my personal opinion, I've been playing D&D for a while now. And I think the times that I've been grappled and or been underwater are very, very few. I could name them on my hand. I could count them on my hand. Times I've been restrained have been okay amount of times. That's been happened a lot. Compared to the others, at the very least, it's happened a decent amount of times, and I could see that being useful. I just think in general it won't be used. But that's just my opinion. I don't rate that particularly highly. I don't think it's the worst, I just don't think it's the best. At 15th level, you can call on the force of crashing waves. As a reaction, whenever a creature moves into or out of your reach, the target takes 1d12 bludgeoning damage and must succeed on a strength saving throw against your spell save DC or be knocked prone. Not bad. I've talked about before ways in which they do make paladins like the tank class without making them the tank class. And so with this one, you only really see it in the marine layer, which is sort of pseudo tanking in the sense that you're making it harder for people to hit your friends, and you, but also your friends. And with the the pseudo helping with the pushing them away from maybe your back line. But here is where you really see it, in the sense that you can go, you're moving out of my range. You're going to go hit my friend. No, you're not. Hit with 1d12 bludgeoning. You're not prone. You can't move now. Well, it takes half your movement. And so you're probably not getting to my friend. Or, you're moving closer to me. I want to have a turn after your turn where you're prone. So I'm going to hit you with this. At 18th level, your orb becomes 30 feet. Normally it doesn't really say this, but I guess because it's the Matt Mercer one, they wanted to say that. At 20th level, you get your transformation. It's called Mythic Swashbuckler. At 20th level, you learn to channel the spirits of historical sea captains to briefly become a paragon of heroic adventure. As an action, you imbue these spirits of the sea to gain the following benefits for 1 minute. Your advantage on athletic checks, you gain a flat climbing speed. If you already have a climbing speed, it's doubled. If you're within 5 feet of a creature and no other creature are within 5 feet of you, your advantage on attack rolls, you kind of get a pseudo swashbuckler ability from the rogue subclass. You can take the dash or disengage action as a bonus action. Again, kind of like the rogue thing. Your advantage on dexterity checks and dexterity saving throws against effects you can see. I think this is interesting because, to me, this ability implies you're like dexterous, and nothing that a paladin is, like the generic paladin, is wearing heavy armor, and most of the time you probably want to be wearing heavy armor because you don't want another. I guess you could switch out your strength for dex, but generally every one of them is kind of wearing heavy armor. This kind of makes me think that you, at least narratively, don't want to be wearing heavy armor. I don't know, that's confusing me a bit in my head. Maybe this one's supposed to be a lighter armor paladin. Anyway, its abilities itself aren't bad. Advantage on athletic checks means that you can't be really grappled as well, and you can grapple people decently. Having a climbing speed, if you're going Oath of what's it called specifically, Oath of the Open Sea, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time on a boat. So having a climbing speed isn't bad. If you're having advantage when you're within 5 feet, I mean, you're really supposed to be the only person tanking, so it kind of makes sense for that. That's a nice little extra thing. Having dash and disengage isn't too bad. It means you're not restricted by what they are, in the sense that you can disengage and move to your friends to help them, whereas they would have to take attacks of opportunity or obviously use their action. Having an advantage on dex saving throws is very useful because there's a decent amount of saving throws that require dex, notably Fireball. I don't think that's too bad. In general, Open Sea isn't bad. I think its spell list is pretty lackluster. I think its channel divinities are pretty good. Its aura is a bit lackluster, and I think its transformation is pretty decent. Generally middle of the road. But then again, in the scheme of paladins, I think I put this like relatively high, maybe second or third. Redemption Paladin. This is actually a one I've actually played, funny enough. The spell list, it's not bad. Sanctuary Sleep, Calm Emotions, Hold Person, Counterspell is very useful to have. On a Paladin, you wouldn't normally get that, so that's quite useful. Hypnotic Patterns are decent AoE. The Sphere, I don't really understand the use of, if I'm being completely honest. Wall of Force is quite useful to block out areas in crowd control. Channel Divinity. You can use your Channel Divinity to augment your presence with divine power. As a bonus action, you grant yourself a +5 bonus to Persuasion. Now, I like this ability, and I know it's very similar to other abilities we've seen, but I think the major difference here is Persuasion is very, very useful. Because Persuasion is done a lot. and it's kind of like, I feel like a skill that it's very unlikely that you'll go 2 sessions without using this skill. I honestly believe. So I think this ability is quite useful. I feel like if this was made nowadays, it would say +10, interestingly enough. I don't think it's too weak at +5, because +5 is fine. Rebuke the Violent. You can use your channel divinity to rebuke those who use violence. Immediately after an attacker within 30 feet of you deals damage with an attack against a creature other than you, you can use a reaction to force the attacker to make a whiz saving throw. On a failed save, the attacker takes radiant damage equal to the damage it just dealt. What I like about this ability, oh, by the way, on a successful save, it takes half. I like 2 things about this ability. One, it's an ability that, at minimum, they at least take half. So you know you're at least doing something with your channel divinity. 2, I really like this ability because it scales in a weird way that you wouldn't expect. In the sense it scales because the damage the enemies will be doing is going to increase. And so by the same property, the damage that you can send back at them is going to increase. Because if you're getting hit by a dragon, or even just like a big giant, they're going to maybe do 20, 30 damage. This means that this is upgraded to do 20 to 30 damage on them. Very interesting. I like both of those channel divinities. Awe of the Guardian. Starting at 7th level, you can shield others from harm at the cost of your own health. When a creature within 10 feet of you takes damage, you can use your reaction to magically take that damage instead of the creature taking it. The feature doesn't transfer any other effects that might accompany the damage, and this damage can't be reduced in any way. The aura increases to 30 feet at 18th level. This is interesting. We've seen a similar ability on the Oath of... I don't remember which oath it was, but there was another oath that had a similar ability like this. Noticeably, this one I think is a bit stronger because it doesn't transfer over any effects, which means that you're not getting hit by the potential, say, paralyze or poison that comes from it, but you're still taking the damage. Arguably, I guess the logic could be that it means that your friend is taking that, but I don't actually know the rules interaction with that. Overall, I don't mind this ability. Again, as I said for the other one, and it feels like I have to say for this one because it's almost the exact same ability. It is an ability you can get as a feat, and a lot of things have this, so it doesn't feel particularly unique. Starting at 15th level, a Holy Presence mends your wounds in battle. You regain hit points equal to 1d6 plus half your Paladin level if you end your turn in combat with fewer than half of your hit points remaining and you aren't incapacitated. This is interesting because it does go with the 7th level ability, so you take hits, which means that earlier on you can heal, and the 1d6 plus half your Paladin level, it's not scaling that well, but it's not insignificant. For example, this is very similar to the Oath of Ancients transformation. When you get to that level, and it's actually it's technically better. When you're below half, I think in terms of 15th level abilities, which in general I've not been particularly high on, I think this one's up there. Maybe 3rd. And 20th level, they get the transformation. Emissary of Redemption. At 20th level, you become an Avatar of Peace, which gives you 2 benefits. You have resistance to all damage dealt by other creatures. Again, you look at that ability, and then you look at other transformations that say, like, non-magical damage, and you're like, why does it have to say that? Why does that one have to have a useless ability when this one doesn't? Whenever a creature hits you with an attack, it takes radiant damage equal to half the damage you take from the attack. If you attack a creature, cast a spell, or deal damage by any means but this feature, neither benefits work against that creature until you finish a long rest. Okay, What's interesting about this ability is it has an interesting clause, which effectively says anyone you hit with your spells, this doesn't matter to. I think this is a weird ability, and I don't know how to assess it until I've seen it in battle, but I think I can make a guess that this ability will be pretty freaking powerful, because you'll just focus down one person and every other bit of damage can't hurt you as much. Especially with resistance to damage, them taking damage back, and the fact that inherently you're healing as well. I think that's a very interesting combination. In general, Redemption, there's not much to say about it, and so that's why it's been a lot quicker than the others. I think it's a bit middle of the pack, maybe a bit better than the average, because I don't actually... weirdly, I didn't come into this thinking this, but I don't think the Paladin has particularly good subclasses, in my opinion. Especially with inherently how they do the level of their subclasses and how you get new stuff. The fact that you get 2 of them, and then there's such a huge jump from 7th to 15th, where you just get nothing except for, I guess, spell slots. Then you got, this is the Oath of the Vengeance. Again, one of the more... This one's a bit more of a grey area. It's not obviously evil, it's more like the anti-hero one. It gets very interesting spells. Bane and Hunter's Mark are very, very good for a Paladin to have. And they're both abilities it wouldn't normally get naturally. This one just adding a little bit... Hunter's Mark adding a little bit of extra damage. Bane just debuffing the enemy. Obviously, you can't have them both at the same time. Getting Misty Step, very useful. Hold Person, I've said probably is more useful out of combat than you'll see in combat. Haste is very powerful. Protection from energy. I don't know why they keep getting this ability. I don't think it's particularly good. Banishment can save a literal battle. Dimension Door is going to be useful in some situations. Hold Person maybe. Scrying will be useful as well. Channel Divinity. Abjure Enemy. By the way, I'm not going through the spells as much detail as I did at the start, mainly because there's a lot of repeats at this point, so if you wanted to know how I felt about that spell, you can literally go back. Channel Divinity. Abjure Enemy. As an action, you present your holy symbol and speak a prayer of denunciation, I'm going to say, using your Channel Divinity. Choose one creature within 60 feet of you that you can see. The creature must make a wisdom saving throw, unless it's immune to being frightened. Fiends and undead have disadvantage on this saving throw. On a failed save, the creature is frightened for 1 minute or until it takes any damage. While frightened, the creature's speed is 0 and it can't benefit from any bonuses to its speed. On a successful save, the creature's speed is halved for 1 minute until the creature takes any damage. Now, we've seen a couple now of Channel Divinities that have induced frightening on creatures. There's an argument to say this one's the worst. It has the passive effect that you get a level 7 as the Conquest, without the AoE that the Conquest gets, but on a failed save it still does something, which I do quite like. Because that means on a failed, you never feel like you're doing nothing. I don't mind this ability, I just think it's ridiculously weak. I like the concept of it literally doing something even if you don't succeed. I just hate the... how weak it is. And obviously, I'm not a metagamer. I like to think of myself as not being a metagamer. But I want it to feel like I'm doing something. And I don't feel like I'd feel like that with this Channel Divinity. Its second Channel Divinity is Vow of Enmity. As a bonus action, you utter a vow of enmity. I don't think I'm saying that correct. Against a creature you can see within 10 feet of you, using your Channel Divinity. Gain advantage on attack rolls against that creature for 1 minute until it drops to 0 or falls unconscious. This is very useful. It's very useful because a lot of the time you're dealing with a single boss. Well, not a lot of the time, but the climactic fights are. And the fact that you can just go, bonus action for a minute, I have advantage on attack rolls against you. That's huge. That's a good ability. Relentless Avenger. By 7th level, your supernatural focus helps you close off a foe's retreat. When you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, you can move up to half your speed immediately after the attack, and as part of the same reaction. The movement doesn't provoke attack of opportunities. I think this is a cool ability. Weirdly, the only one that isn't an aura. I just noticed. But yeah, I quite like this ability. I don't know how useful it is. I think I prefer it over the auras, but I don't know how useful it is because half your speed is probably not going to catch up with the person who's running away. I guess it allows you next turn to get closer to them, but in general, I guess it allows you movements without providing attacks of opportunity, which isn't bad. I think my conclusion is I like the ability, I just don't know how useful it is. Soul of Vengeance. Starting at 15th level, the authority with which you speak with your vow of enmity gives you greater power over your foe. When a creature under the effect of vow of enmity makes an attack, you can use your reaction to make a melee attack against that creature if it's within range. This is very interesting. So not only do you have advantage against them, you can now reaction just attack them. And if you decide not to do that and they decide to run away, you can follow them. I think that's a very interesting ability. Again, I don't know how powerful these abilities are. I think my guess is that they're not very powerful, but I like the flavour and I like what they are in general. Avenging Angel. At 20th level, you can assume the form of an angelic avenger. Using your action, you undergo a transformation. For 1 hour, you gain the following benefits. Wings sprout from your back and you gain a flying speed of 60 feet. Very useful in combat if you can use it. You can be creative with it. Because being able to fly up and being able to fly around up and you can use that to get advantages. It just takes some speaking and creativity. Speaking with your DM and creativity to get use out of that. You emanate an aura of menace in 30 feet radius. The first time any creature enters the aura or starts its turn there during a battle, the creature must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or become frightened for 1 minute until it takes any damage. Attack rolls against the frightened creature have advantage. My worry about this ability is twofold. One, I immediately noticed it wasn't for a minute and instead for an hour. I think they realised that the ability you get is relatively weak. And two, I worry this ability effectively all it says is you gain a flying speed. Because I don't believe at 20th level that anything significant is actually going to get frightened by that. They're either going to have immunity from it, or they're going to have such a high wisdom score just because inherently everything has a higher number when you get to that point. That even though you're constantly hitting them with it, you're very rarely getting it. And the fact that it disappears if you take any damage means you effectively just get advantage roll on one attack from that. I don't rate that particularly highly. In conclusion, I love the flavour of Vengeance. Oath of Vengeance. I love the spells it gets. Its Vow of Enmity is really fun. I just think all of its abilities after that are cool conceptually but weak generally. And I feel like the Frightened sort of sub-angle has been done multiple times and I believe done better. Watcher. Oath of the Watcher, quite interesting. It defends people against extraplanar creatures. Which, unintentionally, all the other paladins do. But this one's specifically just anything extraplanar that wants to get here, no, I'll stop it. Its spells are very interesting. Detect magic and alarm being something you'd never expect a paladin to have. Although detect magic, I guess all paladins can take. Moonbeam's very useful. It's nice little bit of damage over time. See invisibility isn't probably going to come up. Counterspell, I said it before when the other one had out. Counterspell, a very useful ability to have on a paladin, because nobody expects the paladin to have that. Non-detection may come up narratively. I don't feel like it will much. Awe of Purity, it's not bad. Not great, not bad. I don't think I'd be using my 4th level spell on that, but hey, Banishment, I've said before. Hold Person and Scrying, I've talked about before, and they're decent. Channel Divinity, Watcher's Will. You can use your Channel Divinity to invest your presence with the warding power of your faith. As an action, you can choose a number of creatures you can see within 30 feet of you, up to the number equal to your Charisma modifier. So when you get this spell, probably 2 or 3. For 1 minute, you and chosen creatures have advantage on Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throws. That's huge, because that takes off a lot of magical effects. You're left with just like Dexterity, which is a normal one for saving throws. I like that ability. It's little, but I think it'll come up a lot. Abjure the Extraplanar. You can use your Channel Divinity to castigate other unworldly beings. As an action, you present your holy symbol, and each aberration, celestial, elemental, fey, or fiend within 30 feet of you that can hear must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the creature is turned for 1 minute, or until it takes damage. A turned creature must spend its turns trying to move away from you as it can, and can't willingly end its move in a space within 30 feet of you. We've read all this other stuff. What's interesting is this is just a straight buff from another class that only got it for Fey and Fiends, and another one for only got it for Fiends and Undead. But it makes complete sense, and I quite like this ability. You'll get a lot more use out of this than you'll get out of the others, which it's cool narratively, and it's just a cool way of making this turn undead just seem cool, just more useful. Aura of Sentinel. You emit an aura of alertness while you aren't incapacitated. When you or any creature of your choice within 10 feet of you roll initiative, you get a bonus to your initiative. It increases to 30 feet at 18th level. I think that's interesting, but I don't want to be repeating myself over and over again, but I don't think it's very impactful. The only time I see this being useful is in a situation where you had an assassin rogue that gets advantages from getting higher initiative, and you're just giving them a little extra boost. Vigilant Rebuke, 15th level. You learn how to chastise anyone who dares beguilements against you and your wards. Whenever you or a creature you can see within 30 feet of you succeeds on an Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma saving throw, you can use your reaction to deal 2d8 plus your Charisma modifier force damage to the creature that forced the saving throw. I like this ability. I think it will come up a lot, especially if you're dealing with magic-based creatures. The fact it doesn't say spell, it instead says anything that forces you to make a Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throw means it was going to come up a lot, even if you're not dealing with magic creatures. And it's that little bit of extra damage that goes, no, screw you for doing that. It's quite fun. I like that. 20th level ability, Mortal Bulwark. You manifest a spark of divine power in defense of the mortal realms. As a bonus action, you gain the following benefits for 1 minute. True Sight, 120 feet, huge. It means that there's no illusions that can affect you. If you're dealing with Fae, that's a huge bonus, or many fiends. It means effectively nothing can affect you. Like nothing, you can see through everything. Invisibility, you can see through it. Shape change, like um, illusions, you can see through it. Very useful, especially if you're dealing with creatures that have many illusions and manipulation based abilities. Your advantage on attack rolls against aberrations. It is aberrations, right? Yeah, aberrations. Celestials, elementals, fae, and fiends, which statistically are probably what you're going to be fighting at 20th level. There are monstrosities and undead that you might be dealing with, but that set of creature types doesn't encase a lot of freaking types of enemies you're probably dealing with at that point. When you hit a creature with an attack roll and deal damage to it, you can force it to make a charisma saving throw against your spell save DC. On a failed save, the creature is magically banished to its native plane of existence, if it's currently not there. On a successful save, the creature can't be banished by this feature for 24 hours. That is an interesting ability that I feel like is going to be more annoying than it is useful. In a pack of enemies, it's really interesting because you hit them all once, and some of them just disappear. And that's it. Like, they're gone forever. Like, you're dealing with a bunch of little elementals. You hit them all once, maybe 3 of them disappear. You're not dealing with 3 enemies. If you're dealing with a boss, this might be an active debuff because you might be trying to eliminate it, and you've just sent it away. Realistically, what this becomes is, for a boss, it's they make a charisma saving throw. If they fail, use a legendary resistance. Overall, I'm pretty high on Watcher, actually. Its abilities are interesting and have a decent amount of effect. Its aura isn't the worst aura. Its spell selection's pretty decent. Channel Divinities were really cool. Both one that's generally pretty cool, and useful, and one that when it's useful, it's very useful. Vigilant Rebuke was very interesting, and the Mortal Bulwark is not the worst transformation. TLDR on all of these. Ancients, I thought was quite interesting. The heal was very useful. I think it just suffered from being one of the earlier ones. Conquest was decently interesting, focusing on Frightened for a bit, which I feel like increasingly just not do well. Its ultimate form was quite useful, and like most of them, its 15th level ability was a bit lackluster. Crown conceptually is really interesting, but its abilities just don't stack up to it. Its damage mitigation ability was not as good. It's good, but it's not used. It can be gotten by a lot of other people, so it makes it not as great. And its transformation wasn't great. Devotion, it's the generic one. It has decent amounts of spells, and it's just that its channel divinities are a bit behind the time. Effectively getting a turn undead, which is not that useful. Its 15th level ability is quite useful though, and its transformation is not bad, but it's not great. Glory is probably the best one. Has a decent combination of really cool attack abilities, really interesting abilities where you up people's AC and get extra attacks, and its super form isn't bad. It's not great, but it isn't bad. Oathbreaker felt like a worse Conquest. It got a lot of frightened based abilities, but they just weren't at the same level as Conquest Swan was. It feels dreadfully underpowered for what narratively is supposed to be a huge decision where you've effectively abandoned your oath most of the time for power. Open the Sea confused me a bit because of it felt like it was supposed to be like a medium or light armor paladin, and I just couldn't picture it. General, its abilities are really cool and interesting, although its aura is a bit lackluster, and its transformation is pretty decent. Redemption was kind of middle of the road. Got a lot of interesting damage prevention for allies by you taking it, and the healing isn't bad. It is sort of being outdone by Ancients to a certain extent, but overall its transformation was cool and unique, and I think quite powerful. Vengeance had a similar problem to Oathbreaker in the sense that it felt like a weakened Conquest. Its Vow of Enmity was a pretty decent ability, and the fact that got buffed was cool. Narratively, I mean, mechanically, as a cool, very cool abilities, it's just I think they're quite weak. Watcher was quite interesting. I think generally it's maybe second or third. Its spell list is quite unique. Getting access to stuff like Counterspell and Detect Magic and Moonbeam. So its channel divinities were quite cool, one being quite general use and one of them being quite powerful when it's useful. Its aura was a bit boring, but its transformation and its 15th level ability were quite cool and unique. I'll be honest, this Paladin, the Paladin subclasses, now that I've done them, I'm a bit disappointed. I came out of Monk actually appreciating the Monk subclasses, at least some of them, a bit more. I've come out of Paladin, all but maybe two of them, I kind of just don't rate at all now. Which is a bit of a shame, because I quite like Paladin narratively. Anyway, that's me probably done. I'm going to try and fix that chat box for next video, so that hopefully if people are chatting, I don't look like I'm a blimmin' like crazy person to the people in the YouTubes. I hope you've liked this. I've been JD Moss. Bye.